Right. Hello, everybody. It's Craig Hassett with you, and I've got the special privilege of having Sara Lazar with us today. For those of you who may not know Sara and her work, I'll just say a few words by way of introduction. Associate Professor of Psychiatry at Mass General Research Institute, Harvard Medical School. Sara heads up the Laser Lab for medical meditation research. She's a world leader in the field of contemplative neuroscience, has published a series of landmark studies outlining some of the neurological changes associated with the practice of meditation, particularly in relation to the stress response and also brain aging, and is actively involved in research on maturity development. So we'll find out a little bit more about that later on. So we're going to be talking about all of those subjects. So without any further ado, apart from welcome to Australia and welcome to the Monash Centre for Consciousness and Contemplative Studies, just to introduce yourself a little bit more, can you say a little bit about you and how you got interested in this sort of this field of research and work?
Yeah, no, so back when I was in grad school, I actually was doing my PhD is in microbiology. So I spent 7 years cloning genes out of bacteria. And a friend and I decided to run the Boston Marathon, and we overtrained and I destroyed my knee and my lower back. So I went to see a physical therapist. They told me, stop running and just stretch. And as I was leaving, I happened to notice an ad for a vigorous yoga class. So I thought this is a great way to just stretch and stay in shape, and I could still run the marathon maybe. And at that point, this is 30 years ago, yoga in my mind was equated with tinfoil hats. I mean, it was just airy-fairy nonsense. And so I went to the yoga class purely as a form of physical therapy. The teachers would make all these claims like, yeah, I'm here to stretch. But it had a profound impact on me. And I had been a runner for many years, so it wasn't just exercise. I always stretched before and after I ran, so it wasn't stretching. There's something different. And so as I finished up my PhD, I was like, okay, I got to study this. I never ran the marathon. Everyone always asks me that. I never ran the marathon. I just do yoga and meditation now. And yeah, that's been it.
So it wasn't just the physical, but the mental sort of effect of it changed. Right. What were the main kinds of things that you noticed on the level of the state of mind that really, sort of gave you a wake-up call that this is an important area of research?
Yeah, no, definitely. I was calmer and less reactive. One day I walked into the lab and there's this woman, she always pushed my buttons, and she started saying something and I just started laughing and I realized, I was looking at her in a whole new way. And it's just like, whatever, Laura, whatever. And I was just like, whoa, this is weird. How did that happen?
That's not me kind of response.
Exactly. I could just see that I was really calm and just not reactive. And just like, whoa, okay, something's going on here. And it was very, very quick, and so I could see that it was, it had to be the yoga, and just, I'm feeling really good about it and the whole thing. So, yeah, just the more I practiced, the more that sort of stuff started happening.
Yeah. So you then decided to steer your research career in this direction. What were the initial responses from people as you said, I'd like to do research on meditation, yoga?
Yeah, everyone said the same thing. It's ephemeral. You're not going to see anything.
It doesn't exist. It's all in your head.
Exactly, right. And just, as these, advanced states, and there's just, you can't study it. But back in the 70s and 80s, a bunch of EEG work had been done. So clearly we could study it. And also I felt like, okay, my brain is changing somehow. So somehow, something in the brain had to happen. So we had to be able to test it and to be able to demonstrate it. And also because one of my early studies was about physiology, because when you do yoga, your breathing rate slows down, your heart rate slows down. You really have a very distinct, as you start doing yoga meditation, a very distinct, physiological change. And so I thought, okay, that'd be interesting to look at the neural mechanisms of that. Never quite got there. There was all sorts of technical problems with that. But, we demonstrated that, actually the brain structure was changed. And so then that was, and brain activity. And so then that really, set everything off.
So it is all in your head, but you just wanted to look more deeply into what was happening there.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, so what were some of the early findings from the first studies you did?
Excuse me. Right. So the first study was with long-term meditators, And we found there were several brain regions where long-term meditators had more gray matter than controls. So in particular, the insula and an area in the front of the cortex that's involved in working memory and intelligence. And what was interesting with both of those is that when we supply them, because it's well known, the whole front half of the brain shrinks as we get older. This is why as we get older, we're not quite as sharp as we used to be. It takes a little longer to figure things
So it's
out.
not just the muscle mass, the muscle
Yeah.
mass up there shrinks as well.
Unfortunately, yes. But in these two regions, the gray matter in the meditators was similar to the gray matter in 25-year-olds, suggesting that it's sort of just like muscles. You know, if you continue exercising into your older age, you can maintain muscle mass. And so if you're working those brain regions, they should be able to maintain them into older age. And that's what it seemed to be. But it was a cross-sectional study, meaning so we just looked at people at one time. So, a lot of people are like, well, meditators are weird. And their diet is different, and they take a lot of time to rest and relax. So maybe people who choose to meditate, that's what their brains were like, even before they meditated, and it had nothing to do with meditation. And that's a legitimate criticism, right? So the second study we did was we took people who had never meditated before, we scanned them, we put them through an 8-week mindfulness program, and then we scanned them again, and we found that there were changes in the brain. So that was, compared to a control group. So that was a little bit more definitive that, no, that really was meditation.
Yeah. So which are the main areas of the brain? And you were studying mindfulness meditation?
Correct, yes.
So which were the main areas of the brain that were being affected now? And some switching on, some switching off. So
exactly, yeah.
Can you say and what are those areas of the brain
right
responsible for doing?
Right. So one of the main regions we found was the posterior cingulate cortex, or the PCC. This is the part of the brain that's most associated with mind wandering and with self-related processes. So whenever I'm thinking about how this is relevant to me, we're activating the PCC.
So self-referential thinking,
yeah,
me thinking.
Yeah.
Which could be all sorts of things, what am I going to do? What does everybody think about me?
Exactly. So whenever it's relevant to me, that's the PCC. And so we saw that getting bigger, which at first was like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But we know that sometimes more gray matter means more activity, and sometimes more gray matter means less activity. And now we and other people have shown that that region gets turned off during meditation, and it's less active in general in long-term meditators versus controls, and even over the course of 8 weeks, it becomes less active during rest. So it really does suggest that the change in the structure is somehow turning down the volume on that. And so,
well, just for a start, sometimes people say meditation, well, you're just sitting there thinking about yourself,
yeah,
and it sounds like it's the opposite of that, stopping thinking about ourselves.
yeah,
which is
exactly.
a bit of a relief.
Exactly, yeah, because that's the whole point of meditation, is that when the thoughts of when start, it's like no, let go of that and just tune into sensory experience, right? And so breathing sensations or sounds, and so there isn't a lot of me, it's just sensory experience. Yeah,
right. So coming to our senses, as it were.
Exactly.
So the PCC was one area. Or other areas.
Right. So another area was the hippocampus, which is involved in learning and memory. And we've since done a bunch of studies demonstrating that both the size of the hippocampus and also the connection of the hippocampus, I'm talking fast, sorry. The connection of the hippocampus to other brain regions changes pre-post training, and that these changes confer real benefits. So both cognitive benefits like memory and these sorts of things, but also emotional benefits.
Such as?
Welfare conditioning, which I guess is sort of actually kind of cognitive, but yeah, that's a hard one to explain. But so good old Pavlov, with the dogs and the bells and the food, we did the same thing, but instead of bells, we used lights. Instead of food, we used electric shocks, and we paired them. And so then, so you pair them, and then you unpair them, and then you bring them back the next day, and you say, okay, do they remember that, the light means I'm gonna get shocked, or do they remember that light means I'm safe? And we know that people with anxiety and depression, they don't remember very well. They're and it's because of the hippocampus is compromised in people with anxiety, depression. And so what we found was, that the change in the hippocampus conferred better ability to remember that the light meant I'm safe. Which is, it's important for, like, say, PTSD, because you need to know, when I'm back home, I'm not in the war anymore, that, okay, if I hear backfire, I'm still safe, and I can let go of the fear and whatnot. So, okay, it's like, okay, now I'm safe. So, it has a lot of implications for PTSD and other anxiety disorders.
So is this one of the things with anxiety, is that it's very easy and common to anticipate when events are coming up. So we've activated the stress response dozens of times before even getting there. And whereas, so for the meditators, what do they sort of stop doing that?
Right, exactly. Yeah, and this is, again, just 8 weeks of practice. And what we found was, another thing we found was that, so the controls activated visual cortex, and an area of visual cortex that's involved in sort of hypervigilance and sort of anxiety. It's real known to
Really?
with anxiety.
You
Yeah,
know, on the alert, ready to be.
exactly,
No.
exactly.
Right.
Versus the meditators were paying attention to their hand where the electrode was placed. And we didn't tell them to do that. We didn't tell them to be mindful. We didn't tell them anything. We just said, hey, go in the scanner, we're going to shock you. And so we lit the lights.
Is that the kind of thing you like to do in your lazy time?
Yeah, no, so I'm not gonna do that one again. But it's a very mild electric shock, a very mild electric shock. But yeah, so even though they knew they were gonna get shocked, they were paying attention to their hand. And what they also did was that,
So if there was a sensation, they responded. If there wasn't, they didn't.
exactly,
Yeah.
and they were just paying attention to what, it's the definition of mindfulness is paying attention in the present moment to what's actually happening, right, non-judgmentally. And so it was really clear that they're paying attention to their present moment experience non-judgmentally. Because then the other thing we found was that the more they pay attention to their hand, the better they remembered it. And also, there was less anxiety. And so it was really clear that so mindfulness, because lots of times, people do a body scan or the breath awareness, and it's like, okay, yeah, it's nice, it's sort of calming me down, but is it doing anything? And the short answer is that, yeah, by practicing paying attention to your body, then when you're in these unpleasant situations, you sort of do it spontaneously without even having to think about it, right? Again, we didn't tell them to meditate. They just spontaneously did it, and that was more adaptive.
Mhm.
So it's, you really are practicing being in the present moment, and that really is adaptive.
Yeah. So this sort of tendency to be able to respond to things when they're there, but not to be stressed when they're not,
Yeah,
seems to, must time and again be switching off the unnecessary activation of this whole stress or fight or flight response.
exactly. Yeah,
Well, that would have to be good physiologically, not just
Exactly.
neurologically and emotionally.
exactly. Yeah.
So there are people often talk about these different aspects of suffering. Like when something happens in life, or there's a physical sensation, might be unpleasant. But so with there's that, but then it's what we make of it, the thinking, the elaboration on it, the anticipation of it, the replaying of it.
Yeah.
So we're able to sort of cut that
Exactly.
short.
Exactly, right, because that's the thing, is because they see the light and then there's like a second or two and then they get the shock. And so that's the thing, and so they didn't know if the light meant they're gonna get shocked or not. And so instead of being like, oh my God, I'm gonna get shocked, it's just like, okay, maybe I get shocked, maybe I don't. And so just being open to whatever is and being okay with whatever is.
So kind of equanimity. And
Exactly.
did the people who practice mindfulness, did their brains register that they were feeling things more, or feeling things the same, like physically, but they had obviously less emotional reactivity to it.
Right, exactly, yeah, because the hand area got lit up only in the meditation group, not in the controls. So it really was clear that, yeah, they are paying attention to the sensory experience and the controls were freaking out about the lights.
Yeah, should do a study in the dentist chair, because a
Yes.
lot of people have a lot of anticipatory
Exactly.
anxiety in the dentist chair. And even before there's a physical sensation, most people tend to find that they're suffering, apprehensive. I noticed that for myself one time, when I was younger and avoiding the dentist's needle, and I thought one time, have the needle but turn the attention towards it. And when I turned the attention towards it and just was curious to pay attention to what I experienced, it was just a sensation, or what my mind had made of it. previously was
Oh,
enormous.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that, being able to just stay in the present moment when things are unpleasant. And so the classic example of this is that, after China invaded Tibet, they kidnapped a bunch of Tibetan monks and they tortured them. And some of the monks developed PTSD, but some didn't. And when they came out, they said, yeah, they just had to, stay in the present moment, remembering to hold compassion for the people. So even though they're gonna be horribly tortured, they were able to maintain that equanimity. And, which is amazing, because it was a couple of years of this going on.
you're not doing that in a laser lab, are you?
No, definitely not. No. But I mean, that's just like, so, that level of equanimity is possible. I mean,
Yes.
obviously, it's, gotta go live in a cave for a couple of years, but I mean, obviously none of us are ever gonna, hopefully, none of us will ever have to face that. But for, the dentist chair, little aches and pains of life.
Flying.
Exactly.
Thousands of things.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the hippocampus, the amygdala
Uh-huh.
is a really important part of this whole area. So what happens with the amygdala? And
Right.
what is the amygdala? Why
Yeah.
does it matter?
Right, so the amygdala is the main fight or flight and anxiety part of the brain. It's an emotion part of the brain. Last time, the amygdala gets a bad rap. When people are like, oh yeah, I gotta turn off the amygdala. It's like, no. You need the amygdala. Like you need, if you're driving down the street and suddenly a car, cuts in front of you, you need the amygdala to go, oh, whoa, and slam the brake. Otherwise, you're gonna slam into them. So you need that jolt of adrenaline to, navigate through life. To avoid danger sallies. In fact, there's people who have, damage to their amygdala. It's hard, if they are living on their own, they don't last long. They really need people to sort of guide them in this whole thing.
So it's like they don't have an accelerator pedal anymore.
Exactly,
So,
yeah. It's like, oh, yeah, I'm getting burned on my hand, huh? As I put it on this, maybe I should take it off the burner, huh?
Yeah. So
Yeah, no, yeah. And so we need the amygdala, but we need it in the right amount, right? And so we don't
When it's
want to
needed.
be overdrive. And so what we see is that the amygdala gets smaller and that the change in the amygdala.
with meditation.
With
practice,
meditation, yeah. And that the change in the amygdala correlates with decreases in stress. So for people with anxiety, what we found was that the activity and the connections of the amygdala changed. And that also correlated with decreases in anxiety. And in particular, what we found was that, so people with anxiety, when they see neutral faces, their amygdala fires, right? So most of us, if you see a neutral face, whatever. But for people with anxiety, it's like, oh my God, what's this person thinking? Oh no. And so they're, need to figure out, we need more information.
So if they see a smiling face, they're okay.
Right, or an
But
angry
a
face.
neutral or an angry face, the amygdala fires off.
Exactly. And so again, in the case of an angry face, again, you don't want to just be like, okay, the person's angry. Like, no, you want them to be able to say, hey, okay, this person's angry. I need to do something.
Need to pay attention, need to be alert.
Yeah, figure, okay, why is this person angry? Is there a danger? Is there a threat? How do I deal with this? Right. So you need that. And so that didn't change, and that's good. But the neutral face, because there's no threat there, right? And so they were less reactive to the neutral faces, and so which is more normal. So again, just 8 weeks of practice.
There was some Melbourne researchers and elsewhere have shown that in early development, some of them were originally animal studies and then later on human studies. So children brought up in a really particularly for young males, brought up in an abusive or really stressful environment, the amygdala got very large and the prefrontal cortex did not develop very well, so they're primed for impulsivity and bad decision making and even aggression and violence. So this can happen developmentally.
Right.
So even for children, now adolescents or young adults like that, if they practice these skills, will it actually have an effect on down regulating the amygdala? Does the amygdala quieten down, or is it reduce in size, or both? Or
right. So we've actually done a study with people who had experienced some form of childhood adversity, and they benefited from it. And both the amygdala and the hippocampus changed both structure and function. We're still just starting to do the analysis, so I can't say a whole lot about it just yet, but it's really clear that they're benefiting from it. And less stress, less reactivity. So it is possible, even with something like that we can start to rewire things.
Yeah, that would take, I dare say, quite a lot of patience and And indeed, courage. You wouldn't want to be stepping into using mindfulness techniques like that without the person teaching it having a really good understanding of
Yes.
mindfulness and an understanding of the mental health conditions that they're helping people with.
Exactly, yeah, yeah, and just, yeah, because when people have a lot going on, and obviously 8 weeks is not enough, I mean, obviously, ideally, they would keep going, but unfortunately, the programs are just 8 weeks, but, you were trying to now think about, okay, can we come up with that's sort of a part two and sort of, so, that's, stay tuned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So generally wouldn't be good advice for somebody who's going to teach themselves or get a
Right.
book and with that kind of background and so on.
Yeah, no.
You want to be well taught.
Yeah, exactly. Especially because, even if you don't have that sort of background, having a real teacher makes all the difference. Because, lots of times you're sitting and your mind wanders and you think, oh, I can't do this isn't working for me. And what you really need to understand is that, yeah, no, that's happening for everybody. And that it really is. And that's just okay. And it seems like you're not doing anything, but then it's really clear that, yeah, it really is.
So the teacher can help you to be less judgmental and reactive,
Exactly.
because we often focus when we're learning on the attention bit. I've got to get the attention bit right. I've got to have laser-like attention, I suppose. And
Right, yeah.
but really the attitude bit matters as much.
Yeah.
So cultivating this sort of, as you were saying before, equanimity, the acceptance, the non-judgmental attitude. So that matters as much as the attention.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because that's really at the end of the day, which we want the equanimity, right? That's really the goal. I mean, this is, enlightenment is just supreme, sublime equanimity under all conditions, which, but so that takes years. But you can start to see it showing up in different places in your life, it's a little bits and pieces. And that's basically what equanimity is just understanding that, yeah, it's all okay.
So you see it happening a little more equanimity in the traffic, a little more equanimity when you get to your favorite cafe and they don't have whatever it is that you wanted to order, just that
Exactly.
equanimity coming in little ways. And I suppose what it can build up with time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, some people say though, equanimity, acceptance, look, if you get like that, well, you might feel a bit better, but you won't be responsive to life and to things.
Right.
Is that a fair criticism, or is that
No.
not quite understanding what we're talking about here with equanimity and acceptance?
Exactly, because the idea is that you still care, right? It's not indifference. It's not like, oh yeah, whatever. It's like, okay, I can be okay. With the dentist jabbing you with a needle, and it's like, it's not tuning out. It's like, okay, this is how things are right now. And just really waking up to the reality of life. We all want things to be a certain way. This is like Buddhism 101, right? So the first noble truth is that we all suffer, in all sorts of ways. The second noble truth is that all suffering is caused by wanting things to be different than they actually are, right? And so if we can see that and understand, like, okay, I can't get things the way I want them to be, right? Can I be okay with things as they actually are and not the way I want them to be? That's where the real equanimity comes in. But that's like uber level. That takes a lot of practice.
So that's an acceptance of the present moment situation,
regardless of what it is.
not meaning that there isn't a response that's required or
Right.
Something to do.
Right.
And to accept what comes with making that change. It just means that here and now, this is the situation. So it's that kind of acceptance of the present moment as it is.
Right. So let's just talk about, making efforts but not being attached to the outcome. So like a great example is, like social justice or activism and whatnot. It's like, the burnout happens because like you're fighting and you really want things to change and then they don't change. And so then you get burned out. And so, yes, continue being an activist, continue fighting for change, but understand that despite everything you do, it may not make a difference. And so it's worth the fight, because sometimes, yes, it does change, but you can't be attached to that outcome. You have to be okay with, banging your head against the wall, basically, getting rejection, getting, things not going your way. That's the, uber level equanimity.
So people like Mandela and Mahatma Gandhi who practiced these kinds of skills. So it wasn't like they were only in for the short haul. People who are able to maintain and really wisely guide that sort of change. So
exactly.
So they're not people that don't care. They're people that seem to be able to care in a different way.
Exactly. So caring without ego. It's like, I'm going to change the world. It's like, no, I'm gonna do a little bit of stuff and maybe it'll make a difference. And yeah, so it's not, it says, yes, it's not being invested in your ego, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've also been involved in some research on looking at brain aging,
Mhm,
and you hinted at that earlier on in our conversation.
mhm.
So where are you up to with that research, and what's it telling us? What's the potential for this? What does even slowing or reversing brain aging mean?
Yeah, no, it's pretty cool. So we did a study where we recruited people with no prior meditation experience, who were 65 to 80 years old, right? So these were, yeah,
Right.
yeah. And we randomized them to either meditation or crossword puzzles and Sudoku. And people love crossword puzzles and Sudoku. They actually did that more than the meditation. Much better compliance. And over the course of 8 weeks, they were about the same. But then when we looked at 6 months, a year, 2 years later, it was really clear. And this has been shown with other forms of mental training that you get an initial bump, but then that bump goes away and you sort of, your performance goes back down to more or less baseline if you just keep doing it. Like it's really clear that in order to get cognitive benefits with aging, you need to constantly learning something new. But with the meditation group, they continued, they maintained and or continued to accrue benefits even though they were still just meditating the exact same way. So it's really a unique form of mental exercise and mental training. And so what we found was, again, the hippocampus and memory, because again, this is one thing that goes with aging is memory. So that's really clear. Also attention, because again, we all get a little scattered and they were able to maintain attention over longer periods of time. And then intelligence, that was really clear that increased over time.
So attention and memory seem to be obviously, but intimately linked. So if we don't pay attention, we don't remember stuff. What happened in the meeting? I don't know.
Exactly.
My mind was somewhere else. So when people pay attention more present, so does the memory just quite naturally improve? It's kind of like it's back online again.
Exactly, right. Because you said exactly, right? If I'm distracted, I'm not gonna pay attention and I'm not gonna encode things. Right. And so, but if I'm just, especially, so what often happens is like you're looking at things and then in the back of your mind, you're like, okay, well, yeah, when this is done, I need to go and get some lunch and then, so you're kind of sort of doing the task, but not really. Right. And we know that this happens. And so, there's a lot of that going on and you're not going to do as well as if you're really paying 100% attention. And so with the meditators, it looks like, yeah, they really are able to maintain attention. And, what we showed was that we did a really boring task. So what it was is they saw pictures of either mountains or cities. And most of the pictures were mountains. And so if there's a mountain picture, you hit a button. But that every so often when you see a city, you don't hit the button. Right. And so it's like mountain, 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 mountain. Oh, city. Oops. Right. And you do this for 15 minutes. Right. Really boring task. And what we see is that, baseline, people do okay for the first minute or two, but then performance really starts to fall off. After the crossword puzzles and Sudoku, they continued that same pattern. But for the meditation group, they were able to maintain performance over longer and longer periods. So about 2 years, they were able to more or less maintain performance over the entire 15 minutes. So it's really clear that, because which makes sense, because when you're meditating, you're just, it's really boring. Excuse me. And they're able to maintain them, over longer periods of time. And this is important because as we get older, as I said, it's a huge issue because, all the scams and stuff like that, so they're not paying attention, we can't figure things out. And so being able to be able to pay attention and to be able to maintain attention is really important.
Did you find a relationship between adherence or the amount of practice and the amount of improvement? I mean, it kind of stands to reason, like in exercise, the more you do, the fitter you get or the stronger you get. Was the same thing found? Did you measure that?
Yeah, it was, I'm forgetting now exactly. I think it wasn't a strong correlation. I think there was some, but not a huge one. So the thing with meditation that's interesting, it's sort of like once you get 2 + 2, you got it. You don't need to keep practicing 2 + 2 + 2 + 2, right? And so there's some things with meditation that once you get it, you got it. And other things that no, you need to keep practicing it. And so so sometimes we see correlations with practice, sometimes we don't. There's also, we think there could be ceiling effects. And so with the hippocampus, especially if people are healthy, there's only so much space for their hippocampus to grow. And so So we're thinking, because there's some hints that may be happening. Because what we see is that the people who start off with a smaller hippocampus have a big change, but people who start with a larger hippocampus, they only see a small change, and so probably there's an upper limit. So, yeah.
Okay, so how far can this sort of slowing or even reversal of the aging process go as far as the brain's concerned? Do we know the full potential yet?
Yeah.
Is there potential for people maybe who have got more advanced dementia? It's a little bit
Yeah.
too late to but perhaps in earlier stages or with
Exactly.
mild cognitive impairment.
Exactly.
Is there potential therapeutically there?
Yeah, no, definitely. There's been a couple studies now demonstrating that, people with the early stages of Alzheimer's, that, you can actually reverse. They typically do like a yoga and like a mantra meditation because it's a little bit easier, 'cause, breath is really hard to pay attention to versus what they'll do is they do a mantra and they do sata nama, so then something they can actually focus on, or like share yoga or something like that. So that seems to be a little bit easier for them and more effective. But it's really clear that, it can really help them.
So a lot of this has really changed the paradigm in a lot of ways of how we understand the brain. I mean, epigenetics has changed how we understand genetics. Oh, it's in your DNA, end of story. But now we know that genes are being switched on and off, and your environment and your lifestyle, what you do, have profound effects on which way genes express themselves or which ones don't.
Yeah.
But it seems that, brain, develops in early childhood. You've got the cells you're going to have and just losing cells the rest of your life. But we now know that the brain's a much more malleable organ, depending on how we're using it. It's changing every moment. There's a real paradigm shift, I dare say, since you started getting involved in this research.
No, definitely. That it's things are much more valuable than we thought. So the other thing is like, people who are very neuron centric. Like, it's like, okay, there's all that other stuff in the brain, but we care only about the neurons. So it's really clear that the cells that are around the neurons are also playing an important role. And so they support the neurons, but they also can influence brain activity in interesting ways. Not lots known about it yet, but it's really clear that, and meditation can potentially impact all of it.
Does it stimulate new neuronal growth, or is it just more connections, or changing which things are connecting with which?
Right.
Or all of the above.
So what's been shown is that typically in the adult brain, the only place you get new neurons is the hippocampus. So in the hippocampus, maybe we're getting some new neurons, but it's also clear that the connections are also changing. And then the rest of the brain, it's either the connections of the neurons or again, some of these helper cells that are around it. Because again, we know that it's doing good stuff and we just don't know, the MRI is not sensitive enough to be able to go in and say, okay, well, we're getting there though. That's the study I want to do. That's on my to-do list. So because it's getting better now. So
another whole field of interest for you has to do with, what at one time was called ego development, but ego became a little bit of a dirty word, and more called maturity development now. What got you interested in that field of research?
Right. So back a while ago, someone gave a talk and was talking about maturity development, and when they explained what happened, and I'll explain that in a second, I was like, oh my God, this is what meditation does. Like this is meditation. This is the fruits of practice. And so the idea of maturity is that Piaget explained that physical and cognitive development goes through stages, right? So when you're a baby, you start off just lying there, and then you crawl, and then you stand, and then you walk, and then you run, and then you start dancing, right? And they're very distinct stages. And you don't skip around. They go more or less linearly. And, it's usually, there's, it's not like you're crawling and then one day you just stand up, right? You definitely, you practice standing up with help and the whole thing. But then one day you're able to it's a very distinct shift that, okay, now I can stand up by myself, right? Now I can walk by myself. And so the idea that many people had is that, well, it's not just physical and cognition, that psychological, spiritual, all of this. And so Jane Levenger said, okay, well, the self, the ego, does the same thing. And so like I said, you said that it's now considered to be the maturity development, the idea being that how I see myself in relationship to others. So early on, it's just about me, right? And so it's my way or the highway.
So you're sphere of your in-group is just yourself.
Exactly.
Your sphere of interest in terms of well-being is just me.
Exactly. And you see this a little bit like in reality television, it's like, they'll be like, oh, they'll like insult each other and then, oh, sorry. But then the next day they're insulting each other again, right? And sort of like they have no clue that, saying this nasty thing to this other person, it hurts their feelings and
saying sorry is only because, maybe it puts me in a bad position, for having said those nights. So because I'll get some advantage in it.
exactly.
So really totally self-absorbed.
It's totally self-absorbed, yes. But then the next stage is, okay, I understand that, no, you have feelings and emotions and I need to be aware of that. And that my actions will impact you and that matters to me, right? And about 70-80% of the population is at that stage. But then you can get later stages as well, where it's like, okay, well, there's me, there's you, but like, you're a male, we're both white, how does that influence? Like, one of us is black, how would that influence or original? How would that influence our relationship? How has society influenced how we think about things and how we go about doing our things?
So you're thinking collectively,
Exactly.
the in-group is expanding.
Exactly. So just really having on mind. And like anyone, of course, can think about that, but we don't habitually. So sort of like the person on the reality TV, they of course they can understand that the other person has feelings and emotions, but they don't habitually think about the other person's emotions. They only think about their own. Versus, people the next stage, they habitually think about, okay, yes, you have emotions, I have emotions, our relationship. But we don't habitually think about, okay, how is society influencing us? But then at the later stages, that is just as online as, it is for us. And so like every time you're interacting with people, you're thinking about that and it's sort of in the background, just the same way that, it's like, oh yeah, of course, I'm not going to insult you or whatever, or say something mean to you. Because, that's just, you have that bigger understanding. So
is that kind of like eventually getting to a point of a sense of common humanity that
exactly
everybody deserves care and compassion?
exactly.
Does it even go beyond humanity? You have a care for the whole planet, the whole of nature.
Exactly. Animals, the planet, everything. And so at every level, there's also, and it's not just that, there's also more and more understanding of that our thoughts are just thoughts and that we're, who I am as a person is not necessarily my thoughts. And that I can, it's more about my actions. And, because all of us can have a stray thought like, oh, I want to kill that person. But most of us don't have done that, right? And so being okay with the fact that, okay, maybe I have a little bit of anger towards that person, right? And sort of how to explain it? Sort of getting perspective on how we are a collection of ideas. And again, we all have parts, right? For those we know about parts work. And so just much more, just a very rich understanding of our inner life. And that just at each stage you just get more and more and more awareness of that.
Concerns about social media have been in the press quite a lot recent times. And one study I saw was looking at university students, and the more they use social media, but particularly visual forms of social media,
Interesting.
the more narcissistic they became.
Oh, wow.
So they just mapped the level, they measured narcissism before, and then they followed them over months throughout their the following year at university, and they just found a strong correlation between how much they were using that and levels of narcissism. Other studies have followed adolescents for over years. One Australian study was looking at nearly 3,000. They found that the more using social media, and particularly online on the internet all the time, the more they used it, then the poorer they did on emotional development and emotional regulation, etc.
Makes sense.
Is this one of the main challenges we've got these days? Is social media having pushing people lower down the scale in terms of maturity development, or we don't know? We can have a hunch that it might, but we don't know yet.
No, we don't know yet. Unfortunately, because really that generation is just really coming. That's really had it from day one. It's really just coming into adulthood now. So, but I suspect that, like you said, I suspect that they will be a little bit less mature. I mean, you kind of sort of see that a little bit. Just anecdotally, you sort of see that sometimes people really do. Maybe not quite as engaged as they might be.
So what kinds of things can people do to increase their maturity development, to expand that meditation help, or is it kind of just a hypothesis at the moment? Are there other things that people can do that can help?
Right. So we did a study with long-term meditation practitioners and controls and long-term yoga practitioners. And yeah, the long-term meditation practitioners definitely scored higher than or later than the controls. So it does suggest, but again, it's a cross-sectional study. So it could just be that, again, people who are more mature or more than
Self-selected or
yeah, so we need to, but we're doing a study now to look at change over time. And there definitely are, there have been a couple of studies. So it's interesting that the whole model has not gotten a lot of traction within psychology, kind of went by the wayside, but corporate training has really gotten into it. Like they really can see that the corporate level that, so you get the people who early stage, my way or the highway, they actually tend to be highly effective because it's like someone like say Elon Musk, right? Who, he just plows through and does what he wants. And so sometimes it can be highly effective, but he burns bridges right and left and he's losing people right and left. But sometimes having a singular focus and a vision and that can be beneficial in some ways, it's driven like that. But again, it tends to be very toxic workplace. And so lots of times in the business world, they're trying to get people into later stages because, it's, more productive, more collaborative, more all these things. And so they have done some programs where it seems like the best way to promote growth is journaling and self-reflection. Because then you're really starting to see, okay, my actions, here's the impact of my actions. And just really starting to get some perspective on that. So that seems to be an effective way. Possibly meditation, and then those are what we know so far.
Yeah. Some people might sort of say, well, look, does it really make you happier, or just expanding that just mean the load on you is bigger, and that if you really want to be happy, then look after number one. I mean, are people who expand or move to higher stages in that maturity development, do they tend to be happier or more fulfilled in their lives? Or more miserable and burdened?
Yeah, no, I think it's, I don't think it's necessarily, there was a study that demonstrated that for like the first 2 stages, 2 or 3 stages where it's like, okay, me versus okay, understanding. There was a strong correlation between stage and well-being. But then once you get to a certain stage where it's called post-conventional, where it's when you really start to go inside and you realize, okay, it really is not just about me, and that really getting a deep understanding of stuff, that correlation falls off. But it's hard to know. The questionnaire that we use may not be the world's best questionnaire, because again, it's sort of because the questionnaire is all about like doing well in work and getting your salaries and and those sorts of achievements. Whereas I think for people at later stages, it's more about the relationships, right? And so it's not so much about the salary and the position and the title. It's more about I spent some good time with my dog yesterday. So I think the questionnaires are not really capturing that, unfortunately, just yet. So we've got some work to do. But definitely people at later stages can definitely get depressed and anxious, but typically it shows up a little differently. What they're depressed about, they may not be themselves up so much, as more maybe like a more existential angst. Versus at the earlier stages, it's more, me. So, and then also how you treat people at different stages is also very different, because again, someone who's at a later stage, they can really look inside. And so you could do journaling and self-reflection with them versus at the earlier stages, you really can't. So, yeah.
Well, just in closing, these 2 main areas of your contemplative neuroscience, and then this maturity development. Is there much research to say that people in different stages, it shows up differently in their brains, or is that a field of research that really hasn't been done yet?
Yeah, no. So we've just done one tiny study showing that there's neurocorrelates. There's certain brain regions that correlate with your stage. And so, but again, there's the long-term meditators and controls, so you got to take that with a grain of salt. So we're trying to repeat it now with people going through this training program. No prior meditation experience, they're not getting any meditation, they're just going through a training program.
areas of the brain related to what kinds of functions are different?
Right, so the PCC, so the posterior cingulate, the me part of the brain, makes a lot of sense.
Quiet down for the meditators.
Yeah, and then the two functions that they know or this is related to is perspective taking and meaning making.
Mhm.
Right, and so the more you can make, comprehend your life and, reflect on your life and how the bigger implications of this, that region definitely seems to be part of it. And then taking perspective, because it really is important. This is, and again, this is why we think that meditation will help, because so much of meditation is stepping back and taking a bigger picture, and then stepping back again and a bigger picture and a bigger picture and a bigger picture. And so, that's why we're thinking it's going to be helpful.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a really rich conversation. I've got a lot out of it, and I'm sure that our viewers will get a lot out of it as well. Thank you, Sarah, for sharing some of your wisdom.
Thank you.
Good.
Excellent.